Hello, I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley.
And I'm her daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Heidi and I want to welcome you to Open to Hope Conversations, the podcast.
We believe that the greatest gift you can give yourself after a loss is hope, using this moment to connect with others who have not only survived but thrived.
So let's get started. Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we are going to talk about sibling loss, which I know is a huge issue for you. And we're also going to be in the area of surviving after someone has died by suicide. So we are going to talk about recovering for the trauma of grief. So how do you want to introduce our guest?
I would love to. Our guest today is Maggie Bauer. I have been trying to get Maggie on the show for quite a long time. She knows this. She is a rising star at Compassionate Friends. She is extremely involved with the siblings there. She is also Christopher's little sister. Christopher died by suicide, unfortunately, in 2012. And this was Maggie's only sibling. For the past 8 years, Maggie has been involved in giving talks, teaching education classes on grief, and just basically working with around sibling loss to build awareness for people and to give support. She has been a sibling loss facilitator for the Compassionate Friends and the Brighter Days Grief Center. This year, she received the prestigious Karen Snepp Outstanding Sibling Award, and I was given it in 2020. And again, the Compassionate Friends gives it. For those of you that don't know about the Compassionate Friends, it is the largest peer-to-peer support organization in the world for people that have lost siblings, grandchildren, and children. And she just got a certification as a grief educator through David Kessler. So welcome to our show, Maggie.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And today, the day that we're recording is actually my brother Chris's, what would have been his 42nd birthday. So it's pretty special to be honoring him in this way with you today. So thank you. Yeah, he was as an adult, he was a carpenter and just a really tall, handsome, loving guy. And he's dearly missed. My family, including Chris and my parents, lived in Minnesota at the time, and I lived in North Dakota. So I was about 9 hours away from the family when Chris died. And I obviously drove home and spent 9 days with my family. And then I had to go back to my old life where I didn't have my family surrounding me. I also knew I was working on a wild horse research project during that time. And I realized that I couldn't come home and drop everything that I was working on in North Dakota and be everything for my parents. There's no possible way. There's no way to replace Chris. I couldn't pretend to try to be him for them. I couldn't. I knew that I stayed in North Dakota for another year after Chris died. And I knew that is what I needed to do in order to grieve for myself. And I also kind of knew that my parents maybe needed that too, because if I were there, as you both know, there's an aspect of sheltering your own grief from your loved ones, even those that we love so much. We can't always have just those honest heart-to-heart conversations. Like sometimes we just have to do that grieving on our own. And I didn't want to go home for the holidays after Chris died. And so I asked my parents to come out and visit me, and they did. And my sweet mom, I feel like I won the mom lottery with my mom. She's wonderful. And she was attached to the hip with me. I mean, just literally every room that I went into, she came into.
Well, was that because she needed your support, or was it because she thought something was going to happen to you too?
Probably both.
Okay.
I think a little bit of both. I think she needed to be near me because we comforted each other. And also, she lost her oldest only son. And what now? Because I am the more adventurous one and the one that would take more risks. So what now?
Yeah, I could see that because I remember getting very paranoid about the other kids. And how were you feeling about that?
At the time, I think I recognized what it was, but then they had to leave, they moved back, they went back to Minnesota, and then I was back, working. So I worked with wild horses or research wild horses, but I was also working at a juvenile facility in North Dakota. And that was pretty fascinating because um, the day that I got the news, I didn't tell work in a professional way. I basically just blurted it out to them and said I
Mhm.
have to go home. And in that, then the workers found out and some of the kids found out. And I kind of wish that that hadn't happened that way. But it did. And some of the kids actually came up to me after I came back to work, and we had some really heart-to-heart conversations that I know would have never happened had Chris not died by suicide, because they were able to open up and talk about, the losses they'd had in their family.
Right.
Well, and I would think if they had had suicide, it would have been a real opportunity for them to connect and be able to tell their story and open up. Because I mean, as you know, Maggie, the issue with suicide is that no matter how our siblings die, we need support. And I often hear people say, well, they died by suicide, so I don't even know how to talk to the person, so I just won't even say anything.
Absolutely. There were family members that wanted to call it a work accident and not a suicide. And that term suicide is so general. But then when you hear the suicide stories, they're very specific to the person that died. There's a lot of differences. Being raised in a religious family, there's a lot of shame surrounded by the word suicide.
Mhm.
And in order to work through that, it takes a lot of effort.
And how does one work through that, do you think? What are things that help people to work through it?
Specifically for me, I felt like my brother's death was a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me years and different trainings and even outside trainings. There was a neurological nurse that I was going to her talk at a conference for the people that I was working with. So it had nothing to do with my brother, but the way that she spoke about certain things helped me understand that, my brother had been a carpenter. He had hit his head throughout his life a couple of times. He had fallen off a ladder the summer before he died. And this is speculation, but there is so many pieces about suicide that are speculation. We didn't get a
Right.
note. So
So
in
he had
order
some head
for-
trauma prior to his death.
that is a fact. Yeah. So for me to figure out what the puzzle pieces were, pick them up, look at them, and then attempt to put them in a puzzle. And truthfully, the puzzle's never going to be complete. And I had to accept that and figure that piece out.
So there might always be questions. And I think for many of us, there's questions. How did it happen? Why did it happen?
How did they die? How did he take his life? And is that okay to ask people?
That's a great question, and I'm going to give you
Mhm.
my opinion.
Mhm.
What we say in my family is it's really not important how he died, it's important how he lived.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, that's
us,
the interesting piece, Maggie, because people are always fascinated by how our brothers died. Once we
yeah,
tell them, they just move on to the next thing. And I'm like, well, now we want to talk about them, Christopher and Scott, and what they were like, etc. I'm wondering, did being with these wild horses and all your experience with horses, has it helped you? Does it help people heal? And if so, how?
Mhm.
oh, awesome question. So my maternal grandfather, the one that also taught Chris his beginning carpentry skills, um, brought me to the first place where I got to horseback ride, and I was 9 years old. So I was taking riding lessons as a 9-year-old, just head over
Wow.
heels for horses.
Mhm.
And that love never went away. They're just incredible sentient beings, and they are able to be present. That is their life, is to be present. And those of us that are just in our heads so much reminds us to, when the horse just changes their gaze from where they are to looking, further in the distance. Okay, recognize that. What are they looking at? And how can I be more present in my own life and be more present with my own grief? So yes, when Chris died, I was researching wild horses and hiking throughout Theodore Roosevelt National Park, and that was 46,000 acres. And my job was to find a different group of horses, well, basically all the mares throughout the week, and then it would start over the next week. So my job was to hike my butt off in a national park. Now think about that. When we understand trauma and we understand movement and we understand physical activity and how those things can have a positive impact on processing grief. So I just happen to have this incredible job where I'm hiking, and I'm often on my own too, but it's okay because I'm surrounded by incredible nature. And then I get to go observe horses.
So like
And
you said,
I'm-
walking and hiking and being in nature moves the trauma through our bodies.
Yes, yes,
Mhm.
it does.
What did you then move on to from horses as far as your grief training went?
Just that one tool wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I moved back a year later and I told my parents, I said, look, I'm going to go to Compassionate Friends. You're welcome to come with me, but I'm going. So as you guys know, the story is usually that the parents drag the siblings. Well, this
Right.
Yes.
sibling drug her parents. Compassionate Friends is a wonderful peer-to-peer organization. And there weren't the first, I think a couple, there was an interview with a sibling, and that was our speaker for the day. And then there were a couple other siblings in the room. So I felt just a connection to other siblings.
Where did you learn the grief recovery method? How did you decide to go into that?
So when I came home for Chris's funeral, I actually had an interview to get into grad school for social work, and I wanted to go specifically into grief work.
Mhm.
And I did the interview and it went well. And I was honest with them and just said, I hope I get in, but I don't know if I'll be able to handle the workload with, what's just happened in my life. And I feel like I made the right decision. So instead of choosing to go to grad school, I chose to get the certified grief recovery method, the certification to become a specialist. I'm so willing to work on my grief. A lot of people aren't. A lot of people don't want to sit in it and be in it and be active grievers because it hurts and it's hard work. It is hands down the hardest work that I've done in my life is to take each step and move through the grief and find hope.
I think that's well said, that there are people who do want to do it in a family, and there are people who don't want to do it. And sometimes you have to step out there. So what's the first step of being an active griever in your mind?
In a way, grief is selfish because it is happening to you and it is yours. And letting it be that is okay. And also recognizing that those around you may have a different style.
And I think that's really big for siblings, Maggie, because sometimes we don't feel like we have the right to our grief. We might not think that our grief, because society might tell us that our grief isn't as important as our parents' grief. I mean, my parents weren't telling me that, other people were. So, it's like you said, acknowledging and validating that we have had the hardest loss for us imaginable. I think I like that you're saying that. I think it's super important.
Absolutely. And there's different schools of thought on this. But as obviously coming onto a podcast, I'm the type of person that wants to share. And I have had to learn to advocate for myself. And advocating for myself might look differently. So advocating for myself was being able to go to different grief coalitions. And then when I was ready to get certified and then get the experience of being able to speak to different people about my loss and how it relates to their loss, because that's so important to walk into a room full of grievers and say, okay, my loss of Bubby is unique to me, nobody else in the world, but there are threads of grief and the experiences behind grief that we can all feel a commonality about. And that's what's important. I will do my best to never say, I understand how you feel, because I don't. Just like a parent, okay, they lost their son or daughter, a grandparent lost their grandchild, and another sibling could have lost an older brother, only sibling, to suicide, but they didn't grow up in my family.
What are the couple of the threads of grief?
Isolating, loss of concentration. I mean, I would say that these are pretty common things, you know, the change in sleep patterns, the ability to communicate effectively shifts. How do we put into words everything that is in our hearts?
Yeah, and I really like that idea of threads of grief, and the uniqueness of grief for everybody, depending on who you lost and all that, and your personality. And well, tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Yes, absolutely. I do have a website, mbgriefrecovery.info. I'm near Taylor's Falls, Minnesota, and I've recently purchased with my partner a 32-acre hobby farm, and we'll be doing grief education on the farm with the horses.
Wow, love it.
A wonderful idea. Animals and pets, they're always happy to see you.
Exactly, right? And we just need we need that reminder. We need something silly. We need to find hope in nature, in animals, in the sweet moments of life that we feel like might not ever come back, but they do.
I love that, Maggie. And can you give people the online sites where you frequent for sibling support? Because I know you're out there doing a lot of support and giving and getting a lot of support.
Yes. So the biggest one is TCF Sibs, SIBS. There's also the Sound of Siblings. Those are both through the Compassionate Friends. I have my own Facebook that's MB Grief Recovery.
So everybody, every single person today can get support, because these are all virtual sites and they're all free, which I love. And you can find Maggie on them because she's very active and they're supporting our siblings. And I love that. Thank you very much for building awareness and for being such an amazing support system out there, Maggie.
Well, I appreciate you guys interviewing me today and taking the time and letting me share about Chris on his birthday.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you again. And it is a dear, sweet thing that is Chris's birthday today. And happy birthday to you, Chris, wherever you are.
Yes. And I know that Chris is your guiding light.
We want to thank everybody for joining us on this show today. And Heidi and I, and I'm sure Maggie, also want to say to you, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
I'm Dr. Heidi Horsley. You have been listening to Open to Hope, the podcast. You can follow Open to Hope on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To learn more, visit us at opentohope.com and go to Apple Podcasts to subscribe.
I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley. Join us again next week for another Open to Hope conversation, where we invite you to lean on our hope until you find your own.